A massive tax cut at the federal level. How does it play in Ohio? Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Laura Bischoff, State House reporter for the Dayton Daily News. Andy Chow, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio State House News Bureau. Michael Miller, former Franklin County prosecutor. And Ray Miller, former Democratic state lawmaker and publisher of Columbus African American. It's a done deal. President Trump has signed into law a major rewrite of the U.S. tax code, the most significant in 30 years, also delivering the president's first major legislative victory. GOP leaders insist the bill is a win for the middle class. The relief, however, is temporary. Tax cuts for most individuals will expire in 2026. The corporate tax rate, which drops from 35 to 21%, is permanent. As for Democrats, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi warned that the bill will haunt Republicans.
Now we know they're popping champagne down Pennsylvania Avenue. There are only two places where America is popping champagne: the White House and the corporate boardrooms, including Trump Tower.
And salting crumbs they give working families are meager and temporary. The tax breaks for corporate America are vast and permanent.
The bill is expected to increase the federal debt by $1.5 trillion. Michael Miller, a lot of traditional Republicans are scratching their heads. Since when do Republicans back a debt increase?
Well, Ann, that's a good question. We've had them before, though. I think under Reagan and maybe 86 or so we had it. And I know the thing is particularly unpopular right now. At least the polls show that in almost every state. But I think it's going to be something that we'll find the answer out relatively quickly. By the time the elections roll around in November, this will be in effect 10 months. We'll see if the withholding tax is really something. We'll see if people are being hired, if wages have gone up. I mean, 10 months is a short time. But by the time we get to the presidential election 3 years from now, whether this is a good bill or a bad bill, I think will show up in numbers. And if the Republicans, if they're right in their assumption, it's going to help them a great deal. And obviously, if they were wrong in their assumption, it's going to hurt them a great deal.
Right, let's look at those poll numbers. Americans are deeply skeptical about the tax legislation. The latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll shows that fewer than 1 in 4 Americans think the plan is a good idea, and nearly 2/3 believe the bill was designed to help corporations and the wealthy. Even Republican voters are skeptical. What are the selling points for everyday Americans in advance of the critical 2018 midterm elections? Laura Bischoff?
Well, I think that they're going to talk about the doubling of the child credit. I think that they'll talk about the top rate going down. That it's going to, because a lot of deductions are changed. More people will file a 1040EZ, and it'll be a simpler tax plan. But I think that it will be interesting to see how everything shakes out, because some people are going to get hit hard with the elimination of the state and local tax deductions, or not the elimination, but the limitation on those. Mm-hmm. There's other little quirky things in there. I'm not sure if it's still in there or not. Maybe Senator Miller might know, but a limitation on historic tax credits, which is going to impact cities and what kind of development programs they can do. There's little things in there like you won't be able to buy your monthly bus pass pre-tax anymore. So there's all kinds of like little nuanced things that people will find out over the course of time.
Because they won't be itemizing.
Right. And also, like you can buy your COTA bus pass pre-tax, but I think that that's been eliminated. There's all kind, it's not a simplification bill. It's not really a fixing it bill. It's a big tax cut mostly for corporations.
Ray Miller, when there's such low approval for something like this, the backers are saying you have nowhere to go but up. And as Mike Miller said, they've got several months to make a case before the midterms.
Well, on the financial side, I think the combination of cuts at the federal level and at the state level, combined with this opioid crisis that we've all been dealing with, is having a devastating impact on the counties. Whether you're talking about the Children's Services Agencies or Jobs and Family Services, even smaller offices like the Commission on Minority Health, just a terrible negative impact that we're going to have to do something to respond to. It's not just putting people in prison. It's not just responding to the crises that children are facing and so forth, but having an overall kind of a fix. But in terms of approval ratings, politicians really know how to calculate that, particularly in light of term limits, gerrymandered districts, safety for their next election, which is coming right up in a few months.
Yeah, and, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Well, we talked to Republican Senator Rob Portman about the whole thing, especially about approval ratings, and he recognized that this tax bill not a lot of people were liking this tax bill in polls. But he said that's because maybe the Republicans weren't getting the message out enough, maybe the media was spinning it a certain way. But what he was trying to say was if you ask a middle-class family to really calculate the kind of cuts that they're going to see on their taxes, that a lot of them are going to see a lot of tax cuts. If you have 1 or 2 children, then you're going to see an increase to your tax cuts by the tune of a couple $1,000s. The question is, how beneficial are those tax cuts compared to all the little things that Laura's talking about, little cuts here and there?
Yeah, for example, if they're saying that with the individual mandate going away on Obamacare, that 13 million people will drop out of that system, and it'll cause premiums to go up maybe 10% or more for others.
These hidden costs, right?
Right. So there's you might get a cut here, but you might see an increase there. So it's difficult at this point to discern. And I don't think that there's any average case. I think that it really is a taxpayer by taxpayer basis on who's going to benefit and who's not.
And there's also a fear that in 8 or 10 years, when it comes time to extend these tax cuts, if lawmakers don't extend these tax cuts, then it's going to be
like a really
big hit to middle class.
Right. But historically, on tax cuts, when we have things that are given like that aren't ultimately rubber stamped for the second time around. I mean, I'd be surprised that. If when it comes around 220, is it 25 or 26?
2026, I think.
2026. My guess is that they'll be extended unless some cataclysmic event has transpired. They don't take away those benefits too often.
The Bush tax cuts were extended in 2010 and then made permanent in 2012. And the problem, though, with extending or making them permanent is then it piles more onto the debt.
It does.
It's just not an approval rating of the members of Congress, but I think the president's approval rating supersedes all of that. I mean, here you have a person who has lied consistently at least 20 to 35 times a day, and so the public really doesn't have any confidence that he's going to be, honest and truthful going forward.
I got to believe that the president probably feels like the student who struggled with every assignment all year and pulled off the miracle final exam grade because he finally got a win at the end of the year.
Okay, Franklin County Commissioners on Tuesday unanimously approved a permanent sales tax. Commissioners 4 years ago adopted what was supposed to be a 5-year tax to pay for a new forensic science center and the first phase of a new jail, as well as some economic development and social programs. Commissioner John O'Grady blames state and federal lawmakers for the problem.
We didn't have a crystal ball back then. We didn't know that when we entered into this commitment that our partners, and I believe in working very closely with partners, but we didn't know that our partners in state government and our partners in federal government were going to break their commitments to us.
This is an ongoing issue between mostly Democrat-controlled big cities and counties and GOP-controlled state government, really. Ray Miller, John O'Grady also said that Republicans at the State House make easy choices to make themselves look better at the expense of local governments. Isn't that kind of an oversimplification or not? You were there.
I was there for a long time, 24 years. I think John is right, and the members of the commission, of the Franklin County Commission, just 3 of them, they were all unanimous in their support for making the tax increase permanent. The bad thing is when you start off by saying we're not going to make it permanent, then the public doesn't have any trust and confidence, in you. But you got to do, finally, as those who are governing, you got to do what's in the best interest of the public. And we talked about it earlier with the kind of increases at the federal and decreases, at the federal and the state level, then the resources is going to have to be generated at the local level by the county to deal with the crises that we have. We've got epidemics that we just got to deal with.
In Ohio, commissioners can impose a sales tax, but voters can fight it. And that would require a referendum, a vote of the public. They need to get something like 30,000 valid signatures to get something like that on the ballot. What are the chances of something like that, Mike Miller?
Well, I don't think they're very great, and particularly with what we've just been talking about with the tax cut. I think if people have more money, they're not going to be overly concerned with the additional permanent tax. They're used to it now. They've had it a couple of years. And you know, the last one of these we went to, that was only citywide, I know, but when the under Mayor Coleman, when they increased the income tax or wanted it, and the vote was, I don't remember the numbers, but it was pretty much overwhelming,
Right.
supporting it. And, you know, I think the people in this community are economically sound people. They're willing to pay taxes when it's necessary. And so I don't see this thing going on the ballot.
What about the cities versus state government, Laura Bischoff?
Well, this is a common theme that we're hearing among the Democrats who are running for governor right now. Mayor Nan Whaley of Dayton and Rich Cordray is saying it too, that they feel like the local governments really don't have a partner in state government, that state government has been doing all these tax cuts and then basically just pushing the work off on the locals. And so, you definitely, I think it's a common theme we're going to hear a lot of in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the way that Governor Kasich has been able to balance the state budget, there have been a lot of local communities who have been hurt by the different cuts here and there. And we've seen through the past couple of years that the number of local tax levies that have been on the ballot, the number of school levies that have been on the ballot, there's been an increase because more and more people need to go to the polls asking for money because they're not getting as much from the federal and the state level.
Okay, the opioid crisis in Ohio went from bad to worse last year. Despite increased spending to fight the epidemic, drug overdoses killed more than 4,300 Ohioans, making it the second highest death rate in the country after West Virginia. The problem has contributed to the growing number of children in the county-run foster care system. The Public Children's Services Association of Ohio reports that 1,000 more children are spending the holidays in foster care this year over 2016. Most state government debate appears to revolve around criminal justice and treatment. Laura Bischoff, how are state lawmakers taking this news about the foster system?
Well, I mean, this is definitely, something that I think the lawmakers recognize is that there's collateral damage to this, and a lot of that falls on children. There were, in July of 2013, there were 12,600 kids in foster care, and by October of this year, there were more than 15,500. And they're saying that maybe 28% of those kids in foster care are there in part, at least one factor is opioid abuse among parents. And so, between that and like we were saying, like cities feel like they're really getting hammered. First responders in 2016 administered 31,800 doses of naloxone, and by 2017, just this year, it's up to like 43,000. So, there are costs kind of in every nook and cranny of this, and it's heartbreaking to see that there's so many children that are impacted by this.
I wish we had more legislators, though, who had that kind of compassion to respond to the crises that we've had. I mean, I've sat with the members and I've looked down the aisle, and people will come and testify and cry in front of the committee. And those legislators with individuals from their districts will just turn a blind eye to them and move right on. On the Republican side, typically, it's really a shame, that the legislators aren't stepping up to deal with a crisis as we have in any other area.
The ramifications, they say, of this crisis, even if it was ended next week, could go on for another 5 decades, Mike Miller. I mean, when you look at from the criminal justice point of view alone, the long-term, the ripple effect of something like this now?
And I've been around this business for close to 50 years now. This is not new, maybe in total amounts, but all through the 70s, the 80s. If you go to the Common Pleas Court and Municipal Court, but Common Pleas Court, and look at people that come in charged with various and sundry drugs, a high percentage of them have been involved with crimes with drugs, whether it was heroin when that was big, LSD when that was big, crack cocaine, all that kind of stuff. It's there. The difference now with this fentanyl coming in is killing people, whereas it didn't before. But we've had this problem for years and years and years. I don't know anybody, regardless of who's in charge of the legislature and who isn't, that can have a magic wand and end this thing. I don't know how you do it. It's been going on. There's a wonderful book that everybody should read called Dreamland by Sam Keones, and he talks about it, and you can see, I just got a kid out of prison. He did 2 years in prison, never had a problem with the law, everything. Started, hurt his back in an accident, was up to 50 pills a month or a week, I think, on these things for like 4 years. They finally stopped him. They can't have any more. He's hooked. Now he starts stealing and so forth. I mean, it is a huge problem But other than the fentanyl, it's not that new. We've had it. We've had crack-addicted babies, and I know what it is now. It's the worst it's been. But I wish I knew the answer to it. And I sure don't.
I think, Senator, I was going to take issue with something you said that they're doing nothing. You look at they've expanded Medicaid coverage, and that opened up health care for people who are long-time drug addicts for the first time. They deployed naloxone much more widely and distributed more freely. Mike DeWine and a bunch of the cities have filed lawsuits against the drug makers and distributors. They've beefed up the Ohio prescription monitoring system. They've changed the prescribing laws. So I think that the policymakers in power, they do recognize this as a basically a dumpster fire.
We've had a number of initiatives, major initiatives over the years, trying to put something on the ballot to generate revenue for treatment. If you were to go to all the treatment facilities throughout the state, where there's Mary Haven here, and whatever happens, to be in existence in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and so forth, we are not putting the money into treatment for recovery purposes and so forth. That's the real answer.
They say
not
just
all of
about
these smaller things.
40%. They have enough room and space and funding for 40% of the people that are struggling with opioid.
Right. I think that was an Ohio State study, right?
Exactly, the Ohio State study. So.
And we have our children
way behind.
We have our children dealing with issues that children shouldn't have to deal with. I mean, they're having to deal with adult issues as a result of their parents being addicted.
Yeah, it just seems like there's little steps being taken here and there, and maybe they're plugging some leaks here and there, but it doesn't really feel like there's a major collaborative effort to really take a big swing at this problem on both sides of the aisle.
We've got some drug courts, too. Some of the courts have done that. And I think it's been successful. Franklin County Municipal Court has one that I think has really done well. And maybe that's something that the courts across the state ought to expand and do more of. I'm not sure. I've not been close to either of the programs. But I do know that there have been some great success stories come out of it.
That's what it feels like. It's just a patchwork here and there.
Yep.
Some counties have this, some counties have that, but nothing really collaboratively working together.
Just to wrap this up, we know from that Ohio State study as well that was released this fall that the economic toll in Ohio is almost equal to what the state spends on K-12 education, nearly $9 billion a year. So this is gigantic. Both business and labor leaders in Ohio agree that the state's unemployment benefit fund needs an overhaul before the next recession. Speaking of gigantic, after more than a year of negotiations, a fix to shore up the fund used to pay jobless benefits remains in limbo. During the recession, Ohio borrowed from a federal trust fund to continue paying jobless benefits. It took Ohio employers 4 years to pay it off in 2016. Andy Chow, how long will the current stockpile last? And what are the chances of a fix next year?
Well, for the first question, I don't think it'll last very long. If we were to go into a recession tomorrow, that fund that exists right now is not going to last. So there needs to be a fix to make that fund solvent. So the event that we do go into a recession, we do have the amount of money so we don't have to borrow again. But I mean, this is a huge fight at the State House where labor and business groups are still not agreeing on how to move forward. There's a bill in the House right now sponsored by a Republican leader who says, all right, he believes that his bill kind of strikes a 50-50 balance of the burden on labor, burden on business, but it's not going anywhere because there's still concerns from both sides.
I mean, I've never seen them agree on something so thoroughly, the problem, and disagree so much on the solution. Laura
I mean,
Bishop?
it's ridiculously unpopular, the options. It's either employers are going to pay more in taxes or workers are going to get less in benefits, or a combination of the two. So neither side is happy with any two of the three alternatives. The thing that taxpayers should understand is that if they don't fix this and we end up borrowing from the federal government again, it costs a lot of money. Like the last time around, Ohio had to pay more than $250 million in interest on the loan. The loan was like $3.4 billion from the federal government. So it's like, fix it or it's going to cost even more.
And you have to borrow. You can't not pay those benefits.
It's a federal law.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think at this point, I think both groups are seeing that whatever they do come to an agreement to, that's going to be the long-term solution. So nobody wants to kind of give up their ground because they don't want to make it concrete, maybe reducing benefits a little bit or paying higher in taxes on the employer side.
Yeah. Ray Miller, tapping into your experience there. I mean, what does it take to get something like this through?
Some real cooperation for a change in the state legislature and with the way in which districts are drawn, the kind of polarization that we have. the kind of safe districts that we have, people aren't willing to work together as much as they may have in the past.
Another recession is supposed to be just around the corner, and it's going to be worse. And they have less stockpiled because they spent so much time trying to pay off this huge debt. It may not happen in time at this point.
And
Right.
you also have to remember, you need a plan in place now so you can
Right.
start adding into that pot now in the event of a recession. So you need to do this as soon as possible because, like you said, it's right around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. Laura?
Oh, I was just going to say, it's. I think part of the sticking point is that while Kirk Schuring's bill, he says it's half the burden is on the workers and half is on the employers. Depends on who did the analysis and how they came to that conclusion, and so I think that they're kind of fighting over that right now. Kirk Schuring, he's a state representative from Canton. He's a Republican, longtime lawmaker, and he seems to kind of get assigned a lot of the heavy
he
lifts.
does.
Right.
The tricky stuff.
Okay, moving on. Governor Kasich has delivered all 6 of his State of the State speeches in cities across Ohio, never in the traditional environment of the State House. For his final address, Kasich wants to finish where he started it all, where he started his campaign for governor in 2009 on the campus of Otterbein University in Westerville. Michael Miller, even some Republicans are starting to grumble that the expense is not worth it. Do they have a point?
Well, not many are grumbling. Well, sure, they may have a point, but I think the governor just feels he likes to take government around the state and let people see, how it works, and that maybe he wouldn't have that opportunity. Now, Westerville's not very far. I'm sure people in Westerville could wander down to Broad and High and see it, but for whatever reason, he wants to do it, and I imagine whoever replaces him may consider doing that too.
I know. How do you stop this tradition now? Right?
Well, I know it's probably not long enough to be a real tradition, but if it's gone over in these places where he has taken it, I think future governors would like to do it.
I'll say in 2011 he did deliver the State of the State at the State House, but then from there on he took it on tour from Steubenville, Lima, and
Remember that went on for like more than an hour.
And there were protesters outside because that was during the time of SB
Senate
5,
5, yeah.
and so there were protesters outside, and you could hear them chanting from the House chambers. So
Right.
They should have hearings on the opioid crises around the
Steubenville?
state in
Yeah.
various
That'd be a
places.
good idea.
And real budget hearings as opposed to the State of the State. The State of the State should be in the chamber
Why?
because it's the right thing to do. I mean, it's stately to do it that way as opposed to, I've never been to one out away from the state.
Well, I have to say, for
never
selfish
think about
reasons,
that.
I was a little afraid that it was going to end up being in like Ashtabula and there'd be some lake effect, white knuckled drive and stuff. So I'm personally pretty pleased that it's just in Westerville.
But I'll add a personal note too that I've had a good time going to these different cities because it is kind of interesting to see state government interacting with a city that you don't usually see at the State House, or you don't usually see that side of it. So it's been kind of interesting to kind of get this take and that take. We're in Sandusky this year, so we talked about Lake Erie a lot.
Well, someone brought up the protesters during that 2011 State of the State at the State House. And that's something that you're not going to get when you go to small town Ohio either. And it's pretty much been in small town Ohio. It's not like it's been in Cincinnati or Cleveland or Toledo or someplace like that. So you're kind of avoiding some conflict as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, he took it to Steubenville, Lima, Medina, Wilmington, Marietta, Sandusky.
You also have more control. The people who do come to protest, they have to be really far away from the venue, whereas at the State House, they could be inside the State House and protesting.
The people's house, right?
The People's House.
Never had any protests, have we, for the State of the State?
Just the 2011 during the as far as I know. I mean, I haven't been to all
I don't
of them.
remember. That's a good question, and I don't remember if there were or not. Okay, it's time for our final off-the-record parting shots. Ray Miller, you go first.
I think 2018 will be the year of the woman for sure. And we just may have a chance of electing a woman to a major office in the state, maybe the top office in the state as governor.
Naming names?
No.
Okay. Michael Miller.
I think you're going to see people like Harvey Weinstein, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and many other people, powerful people that we have all read about in these past few weeks or months. I think you're going to see them in the criminal field. I think other than just losing their jobs, I believe the pressure will be tremendous on the local prosecutors or state's attorneys, whatever they're called. And I think you will see some indictments come down. Now, there'll be problems with statute of limitations on some of these, but I think you're going to see this move into the criminal era, and may have some people actually in prison or jail because of it.
Andy Chow.
I think we're going to see a big legislative fight over green energy mandates in the state house. The Republicans in the House and Senate want to scale back and even eliminate the renewable energy mandates. Kasich doesn't want that, so I think that's going to be the next contentious fight.
Laura Bischoff.
I think 2018 is going to be the year of the marijuana leaf in Ohio. I think that the cultivators are going to be up and growing, and who knows, maybe we'll get another crack at voting on it as a statewide ballot issue.
Don't say marijuana and crack together.
Oh yeah.
And as for me, Americans currently get tax breaks for their charitable giving. That is if they itemize. The tax bill is signed by the president, would increase standard deductions that taxpayers get if they don't itemize. You do the math, charities will suffer. For now, you get a break if you itemize. So don't forget your favorite charities out there, folks. In 2017, there's still time. Also, on behalf of the whole crew here at Columbus on the Record, the producers and the directors, the interns, and everyone else at WOSU Public Media, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Hope you have a safe and happy holiday season. Please check us out online at wosu.org/COTR. I'm Ann Fisher. Have a good week.